Welcome to Dr. T's Cookbook of Awesomeness. Today, we're making Wasian-style braised short ribs, and we're making hand-pulled Biang Biang Noodles. So let's go cook something awesome. Before we make our dish, we need to prep our meat. What that means is salting the ribs and putting them on a rack on a sheet pan in the fridge overnight. Once you've done that, then we can go ahead and cut them into 1.5-inch cubes. The reason we want to salt this overnight and have it on a rack is so that the outer layer of the meat can not only absorb that salt, but we dry up the excess moisture on the outside so that we can get a really good sear on the outside and a wonderful crust. Our next step is, of course, to brown each of these pieces of meat in our cast iron Dutch oven. Now we have about 2.5 pounds of meat here, so we will need to cook these in batches. We want to make sure that each piece has a little bit of room to breathe. We don't want to overcrowd the pan. Overcrowding the pan lowers the overall temperature of the pan and prevents us from getting a good crust. It traps moisture in so your exterior stays a little soggy instead of getting crispy. As you can see here, after a few minutes, we've already formed a really nice crust on the bottom, and I'm going to use the wooden spatula here just to release them a little bit. They come off pretty easy with just a little bit of a scrape, but as you can see here, as I flip them over, we've got a super dark, beautiful, uniform crust formed in the outside. And that would not have been possible if we hadn't first salted our meat and let it dry out a little in the fridge on that rack. Now we're just going to get each piece flipped over so we can get the other sides a little crispy and brown. I'm not going to actually get all the sides brown, but probably 2 or 3 of the sides. And then once that's completed, we'll put in the next batch. After we've browned all of our meat, it's time to make our sauce. This is the sauce that we're going to use to braise all of our meat. So we're going to start off with soy sauce. As you can see here in the markings on the measuring cup, we're going to use about 200 milliliters or so. To that, we're going to add chicken stock, about half a liter or 500 milliliters. Next up, we're going to add about 4 heaping tablespoons of chili garlic sauce. Now, you can add more or less depending on how spicy you'd like this to be. We've got a half a cup of brown sugar, and I'm going to zest some fresh ginger right into our mixture. I've got about a 2-inch piece here, and you can tweak this to your liking. As with all cooking, it's up to what you find palatable. So if you don't like ginger, you can put in less or none at all. Or you can just skip it if you really hate grating ginger, because this is a real pain in the butt. Next up is just a little bit of toasted sesame oil. We'll put in about a teaspoon to teaspoon and a half, or maybe a little bit more. Again, it's all to your liking. Now just go ahead and whisk everything together to make sure everything's thoroughly combined. Don't get too crazy though, because it'll slosh out and get all over. Get your meat back into that Dutch oven, and don't forget all that meat juice. That juice is flavor. And then cover it with our braising liquid, which we just mixed up. Get that all poured in there, and then just adjust your meat so it's in an even layer. Get your oven preheated to 250 degrees. We're going to cover this with the lid and braise this for about 3 hours, checking occasionally. With our meat cooking, we've got plenty of time to make our noodles. So, to start with, we have our flour, and we have salt, and we have water. These are the only 3 ingredients that we have. So we're just going to whisk that salt and flour together, and then start adding in our water little bit by little bit, whisking with the fork to get that water incorporated. Now, depending on your flour and the humidity, you may have to adjust the amount of water that you use here. Now, I used the amount that the recipe indicated, but if I would have added just a little bit more at this step, I would have had a much easier time bringing this dough together and getting it to a silky smooth texture. So don't be afraid to adjust on the fly a little bit. Now, don't add too much water, but if you do, just add a little bit more flour to try to balance things out. But it might take a little bit of work to get the right consistency for yourself. Now, after everything's come together in the bowl, you can go ahead and put it out on your work surface for the real kneading. Now, this dough takes quite a bit of work in kneading. The hallmark of these noodles is its chewy texture, and you do that by developing the gluten proteins in the dough, and that takes physical effort through kneading to develop those. Now, I hope you're in good shape, because I kneaded this dough for a good 10 to 15 minutes on this first step, and then we'll be resting this dough for about 20 minutes before we give it another round of kneading. So we've rested and covered our dough in the bowl for about 20 minutes, and now we're just going to give it another round of kneading for maybe another 5 minutes or so. As you can see, the dough's relaxed a bit and it's much easier to knead this time around. But I will tell you, again, I could have used just a little bit more water. I wasn't getting the thoroughly silky texture I was looking for. As you can see here, it's a little wrinkly and not quite perfect. I mean, everything turned out okay, but if I would have added just a little bit more water at the beginning, I think things would have turned out a little bit better. So don't be afraid of adjusting things on the fly here a little bit. Now, we're going to put this in the bowl, cover it with some oil to keep it moist. We're going to put a moist towel over the top, and we'll let this rest for a full hour before we move on to the next step. With the resting period complete, we're going to roll our dough out into a log shape. So just throw it down the countertop and start rolling it back and forth until you have a mildly phallic shape. And now we're going to cut our freshly rolled log into 6 pieces. So go ahead and cut in half and cut each half into thirds. Now we'll take each of those individual pieces and we'll roll them into their own small log shape. Once you rolled out each of these individual pieces, just go ahead and put it on a lightly oiled plate until we're ready to make our noodles. To begin making the noodles, we first have to take our individual logs and roll them out flat. Try to get these as flat as you can at this point. We need to roll these out, and they're going to be kind of an oblong kind of shape. But do your best to get it as thin as possible, and it's going to help you out when we do the Biang Biang portion. Before we start stretching, we're going to use a chopstick to indent this down the center. This is going to give us a good spot to rip our noodles in half once they're stretched to the appropriate length. Now, we're going to grip this piece of dough at the ends and flop it up and down, banging it against the cutting board. This is the bang bang portion of this. Biang bang is actually an onomatopoeia. As you can see, that's exactly what we're doing. We're banging it up and down over and over. And then as you can see, our indentation allows us to rip this into 2 separate pieces. We're just going to repeat this over and over again until we've gotten all of our noodles completed. Banging it up and down and tearing them in half. Now our meat has finished braising, and I've removed the meat and left the liquid here in the Dutch oven. I have skimmed off the excess fat, and now I'm stirring in a slurry of cornstarch. As you can see, I didn't get my cornstarch mixed up nearly well enough, so I've got a few lumps, but don't despair, just go ahead and keep on whisking. As you can see, it's starting to thicken up nicely. This is the kind of consistency you want, where it's going to coat the back of a spoon pretty well. Now with the sauce thickened and our meat in the bowl, which I've lightly shredded with a fork, we just need to cook up our noodles and assemble. Get your pot of water to a rolling boil, lightly salt it, and then add your noodles. You'll have to make these noodles in batches because they are pretty long and thick noodles. You don't want, again, overcrowd that too much. The noodles are fresh, so they don't take too long to cook. Once they start floating to the top, you know they're done. Take those noodles straight from the pot and adorn them with as much of that delicious, shredded, savory meat as you desire. Go ahead and load it up, and then take your braising liquid, that sauce that we thickened up, and coat the meat and the noodles thoroughly. Here's the finished product, my friends. Now, if you don't want to put in all the work of making those noodles, and it is a lot of work, just go ahead and use some store-bought noodles. Some tagliatelle would work perfectly in this situation, or even linguine or whatever you like. But if you found value in this video and you want to learn how to make more of this, please like, subscribe, ring that bell.